I know that a lot of Bulgarian queens are sent into Cyprus.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, well, compared to the local race, they're still quite docile, and I know they're pain in the ass for you for many years. Why do you think they still keep using them?
Keep using them because the ones that are sent there are F1. Okay, so when they supersede or when they change the queens to what is an F2, but they get hybrid vigor, okay, from the Cypriot drones that are around. So in the first and second generation, they have good results. And after that, it's going downhill because there's no control and they lose the hybrid vigor. And the other thing is, it appears that the Bulgarian bees, seems like they don't expand so quickly in the spring, and it seems like they have a very low swarming instinct. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, so if you have 2,000 or 3,000 hives and you have a swarming problem, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've seen commercial beekeepers there nearly having a nervous breakdown from swarming. They just said that they just can't manage it anymore because they're driving around with a big truck. Okay, and just all day, every day during April, they're collecting swarms, and you have to have a lot of equipment to handle that. Whereas if you have good buckfast material, even if they're squeezed for space, they won't swarm. Okay, they haven't got a very high. Some of them have. Just depends on the genetics you've got in it. We have Mini Plus with test queens in them, and suddenly, about 2 weeks ago, suddenly it became 30 degrees. Okay. From being quite cool, it suddenly jumped up to 30, and the honey just came like that. Okay, it was a real honey flow, and of course they filled up almost immediately, and we saw that some of the lines swarmed. Okay, just like that. Some of the lines swarm even though I had a lot of room. Okay, so they're rejects. Immediately.
Okay.
And I mean, personally, I hate swarming. Okay, for me, it's a big problem. I don't want to see it at all. And other people look on it like they're keeping sheep, and they got lambs, and they go around collecting swarms, which to me is anathema. I don't like this at all because wherever they find swarms and they collect the swarms and then they're feeding them like anything, and then the next year
it swarms again.
And these bees with a very high swarming instinct, they produce a lot of drones. Okay, so in the actual drone congregation areas, there's quite a lot of drones that are there, which are produced by these colonies that have a high swarming instinct. But fortunately, the buckfast queens have a sort of dominance over this, and it's okay. We don't have much of a problem, but it's just something that I don't want to see in front of me. Okay. It's swarming bees because it's a big problem. As far as the management goes, because if we have to graft or collect queens and that. And you see swarms hanging around, and also people come and steal them and stuff like that. 40% of the north of Cyprus is occupied by the Turkish army since 1974, and it's a different
country.
Well, it's not a different country; it's a different area under the control of the Turkish army, and it has very close ties because all the Turkish Cypriots moved there. When there were problems in 1974, and they bring a lot of queens from Turkey, like 8 or 10,000 a year. And in April, a lot of hives from the Turkish Cypriot area go to the Morphu, with the extensive orange groves, and a lot of hives from the Greek Cypriot side
go to the same place.
Go to, well, opposite them, because in the middle is the green line, which is a demilitarized zone, which is controlled by the United Nations, but in effect it's about 1 or 2 kilometers apart. And of course the bees are swarming, and there's hundreds of thousands of drones flying around and virgins from the swarms, and then the hives go from there up into the mountains or back to Limassol or all over the place. So there's a lot of hybridization going on. Some people might say, to us the Buckfast bees are hybridizing the Cypriot bees, but we're not the bad witch of the whole story.
Yeah, so
it's the Turkish Cypriot area, but they've become interested now in Buckfast bees as well. They're seeing that they're having good results. What they did about 30 years ago, they started bringing Caucasians from Turkey, and of course when the Caucasians came to Cyprus and they were mated with the Cypriot drones, they had very good results. They were getting from the orange up to 100 kilograms, but then the thing collapsed because of the hybrid vigor. They couldn't continue, and so now they're becoming interested in Buckfast bees. We try to explain to them that all Buckfast lines are not the same, and some Buckfast
better than others.
Yeah, and more suitable for our conditions, because in the summer it gets hot, very hot, for a long time, and some of the Buckfast lines just collapse because they just can't take it. We have to look. I think for my part, I have to look at Buckfast lines that have Mida in them, and Sahariensis, and Anatoliaca. We find the best results with that. Of course, some of like Sahariensis, you have to be very careful with
open mating.
Yeah, because you can end up with problematic bees like that. But yeah, okay.
Yeah. What about? You mentioned that they're bringing Buckfast from other countries, from a lot of places. What about Buckfast bees that are developed in the northern countries? How they perform in your area?
They don't perform very well. Okay.
Why?
Well, they're selected first of all for a very short summer. Whereas we have a very long period, and as I said in the beginning, conditions are too hard for them. Okay, it's one thing to have an active season from April until say August. Okay, and then they go into wintering in September, October, and then they don't move again until late February or March. They're just sitting there. Okay, and if they've got enough honey, that's it. And the other thing is that we know that in some countries that they manage extreme sterile conditions. Yeah, they change the combs every year in the hives, and they're performing sterile management. And when they come to Cyprus, where things are not so sterile, because we have some beekeepers that are using very old combs, and in Greece and in Crete, where we see that they're coming down with Nosuma very, very easily, and they don't give us good results. Yeah. It would be nice if it wasn't like that, and we could rely on them, but we can't use that material. No?
Yeah.
We can use it if we cross it with our own stuff, But it's not always guaranteed that things are going to work out.
I've heard that you have 2 brood cycle in Cyprus because you have something like 2 springs that you get honey flows in spring and in the autumn. And I've heard that some bees don't start brooding the second time.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that true?
Yeah. Some of the buckfast don't make it. Okay, and they just run out of bees in November, which is disappointing because generally they're okay. But in the spring they're okay. But once we get along to June and July, and it gets hot.
How much hot does it get?
Some days it's 45.
Okay.
In the shade.
And what about the humidity?
A lot of humidity. But when it gets hot, it can stay hot for weeks, like 8 or 10 weeks. Okay, and it's difficult. Lots of problems in the autumn with bee eaters. In September, we get thousands of bee eaters. Any bee that goes out gets eaten because the bee eaters come from Turkey into northern Cyprus and slowly come down to the southern coast where we are. And they're there in the tens of thousands, and actually we get some compensation from the government for the damage which is done by the bee eaters. But if anybody suffers from damage from bee eaters, it's the queen rearers because they just destroy the drone population, and then. We have to try to get drones ready for the end of October so we can open mate queens because we produce a lot of queens in October and November. You see, if you have a hive, or a 10-frame Langstroth hive, and you can get it to the end of October in good condition, after you extract the honey, you can do your varroa treatments and then look after it really well with light feeding and pollen supplements, and you can make a split from that with 3 or 4 frames of bees. So in the spring, and you get a queen in, you put a cell in it, and she mates. Then in the spring you've got the mother and the daughter, and because the daughter is just 6 months old, many times the daughter is overtaking the mother. And so, if you do a proper management, then if the mother's not doing so well, then you can replace her in the spring. So you can have two periods. As I said, it's not a beekeeping paradise. We don't have any autumn honey flows, really. We have carob trees, and we have Inula viscosa, and it all depends on when we get rains. If we get some early rains, then things are a lot better. We get some ground flora which is flowering, coming up from small bulbs. But sometimes we don't get early rain, and it can go until sort of January with no rain. So things can get serious.
Yeah, so.
We don't have cold winters.
What about the daily difference between the degrees?
Yeah, we can have a lot of difference. A lot of difference.
How do bees manage to survive that way?
Well, they have to. Usually we have at least 10 or 12 degrees difference between day and night temperature, but it can be as much as 20 or 25. Especially if it's in January, we can have some hot days, and then if there's no humidity and a clear sky, then we can have frost at night. So there's this tremendous, like a desert, If you look at the flora and fauna of Cyprus, it hasn't got much affinity with Europe.